Taban. The thing which we have discussed over here, in attitude, first of all, proactive and self-discipline and responsibility. And the big one, I think, which I feel, that commitment of the students. Yeah, commitment is very, very important. And one thing more that is also very important in nowadays even, and patience and tolerance as well.
Okay.
He has to learn in the school as well. And in values, confident, teamwork, and good sportsman as well.
Okay.
Right? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you everybody. Now, the real question is, how are you judging students? How are you making decisions about students? Are you being asked to make decisions about students on these things? Or are you only being asked to make student judgments on reading, on mathematics, on science? And how can we start to develop a culture in our schools that asks ourselves, what do we want our students to achieve beyond the curriculum? Who should we be asking? Ourselves? Who else? The children. Anybody else? The stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? The parents. Okay. It would be possible, for instance, to have a meeting in your school where you invite parents and students and the teachers to sit together and talk to each other. What do we hope to achieve in this school beyond the curriculum? And I think this is the starting point of self-evaluation. That's great, but we also need to look at how do we measure these things. Okay. So what we're really asking ourselves is two questions, or we're making a question in the first bit and then making a statement about how we might implement those things. So if we want our young people to have inquiring minds and to think for themselves, then what do we need to do? If we want our young people to be tolerant of others, then what do we need to do? And this is the basis for self-evaluation. Because what self-evaluation is looking at the goals that we have established for ourselves and finding out how well we're doing. Now, I guess if we want to start looking at self-evaluation as a whole school activity, what we're asking ourselves is, are we effective in achieving our goals? Are most of the students in our school achieving the goals that we set for them? So if we look at the school effectiveness research, we've been told that there are a number of things that can contribute to whether or not a school is effective. There are a number of areas of activity, there are a number of people in the school, there are a number of things that we can do within the school that seem to be associated with more effective schools. This list is a starting point. It's one that was put together. Salmons, Hillman and Mortimer are British people, and it's been around for quite some time. It's been used in a number of different places in the world, and what it says is that if schools have these things happening, then they're more likely to be effective at what they do. So if we're starting to look at an evaluation of the school, this might be where we start. So we can ask ourselves the questions, and a very simple question for each one. Do we have professional leadership in our school? Now, I'm not asking you to answer it, but we're just asking the question. Is your focus strongly on teaching and learning, or even better, on learning and teaching? Do you have purposeful teaching? Do teachers know why they're doing a particular thing, or is it just something that we do today? Do you have a shared vision of where you hope students will be? And so on. I won't go around them all, you can read them yourselves. But if we're looking at an evaluation, Here are the starting points. These are the things that we could look at and say, are we doing these things? Why? Because they've been associated with a lot of research with schools that do things better than other schools. So that's one thing that we could look at. The second one, and this is another version of the same thing, it's saying, okay, if we want to have school improvement, if we want to get better over time, these are the building blocks that we need to put together. These are the sorts of things that we need to have in our school. And again, you can ask your question, do we have a strong vision? Do we have good leadership? And so on. And then we get to something that is really looking at the school improvement process. Now, if we look at what we might call continuous improvement, it becomes a cycle. We do it over and over again. We consider ways in which we might improve. We put into practice the decisions we've made. We test whether or not those were successful, and this leads us to the next level of improvement. So if we look at these, here are some questions that we might ask if we're self-evaluating. First question, how well are we doing? We made decisions, we know what our goals are. First question is, how well are we doing? Second question is, how well should we be doing? Are we doing as well as we could be? Third question is, what more can we achieve? What extra can we do to move ourselves towards how well should we be doing? What must we do to make it happen? Taking action, and then we ask ourselves again, how well are we doing? So this is a model of cyclical or continuous school improvement. And this is a particular school that's taken up exactly the same sort of set. How well are we doing? How do we compare with other schools? Now, is that a question that you get asked? How do you compare with other schools? And how do you answer it? You might be able to answer it in terms of your performance in mathematics and reading, or your performance in terms of school completions and graduations. But how well are you doing in terms of tolerance, in terms of developing understanding, in terms of being able to learn? So these are the questions we need to look at. So if we look at this cyclical improvement process, what does self-evaluation mean and where does it come? Well, what is self-evaluation? It's a fairly simple thing. It's a reflection on where we are. A reflection on practice which is systematic and transparent, with the aim of improving not only student outcome but also teaching outcomes and organisational learning. What can we learn from this process? And again, these things are not rocket science. So here's your turn again. Next set of questions for you. What steps could your school take so that it can make a judgment on how well it is doing? What are some of the things that you could do in your school that will allow you to say, we are doing very, very well, or we're not doing so well, or there are some things we need to improve? What are some of the questions you might ask in your own school? And who would you ask them of? Who do we need to ask questions of? So again, have a conversation with your colleagues on the table and just see what you can come up with for each of those questions. Yep. Okay, so what you're saying, there needs to be a broad view for a start of what school is expected to do. Have a conversation with your colleagues. If there was one question that you think parents might like to ask, what would that question be? Okay? Why would we put our child in your school? Good answer. If there was one question that students would like you to ask, what question would that be? Okay? We have a tendency, because we're thinking at it from the teacher's perspective, of asking teacher questions. But in a true self-evaluation, we should also be asking questions for other people that are interested. So what do you think a student would like you to ask? What is the big question? Are you happy in school? That might be a question that you need to ask in your self-evaluation. Are students happy in this school? That's true. But then what we're doing is asking the question. What we then have to do is explore what the answer means. That's part of self-evaluation.
Questions have to become more specific.
No, not necessarily. No. It's the answers that will be specific. As you say, every child will answer a different way, but then we need to work out what those answers mean.
If you gave a questionnaire to the whole class, let's say, and then you analyze the answers, and you would find that you would get 4 or 5 different kinds of answers and probably come to a judgment from that.
Yep. And that's what I mean. You have the opportunity, but if you never ask the question, you're never any closer to an answer.
But actually we do that in class, where teachers, particularly good teachers who do this, is that they give questionnaires to children at least once or twice a term to ask them to list all the positive and all the negative things they found in class with that particular teacher.
Okay, so what we're now looking at is we have good practice in some classrooms and not in others. But a self-evaluation at a school level
It should be.
is formalising the good practices that will help us to answer the questions we need to have answered.
Because that's a learning experience for the teacher
Oh yeah,
himself or
that's
herself.
why we're here. That's why we're discussing this. How can we improve what we do? And the self-evaluation model is one way of accepting that this is an improvement in what we do.